You are listening to Proof Text, a Galosa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Fredrick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text. I'm Michael Halcomb. I'm here with Fred Long, who's crunching some peanuts or something to that effect, and that's why I'm laughing. So
I'm a little bit snacky right now. I need some energy.
There you go. So if you hear some crunching throughout the episode, that's the source. That's the culprit there. So Fred, you doing all right?
I am doing all right. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, doing okay. Just got back from some really stringent physical therapy, so I'm kind of like exhausted. I always want to just crash after physical therapy. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be tiring. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. So anyways, we're here and we have Galatians on the agenda today. We're in Galatians 5. We're going to pick up at verse 16, and we'll probably get in 17 as well. So if you're watching, I'm going to go ahead and share that on the screen here in just a moment. And if you're just listening, that's fine too. No big deal there. You'll be able to hear. And we'll see if this... There we go. All right. Galatians 5:16-17. We're making our way through this. And I'm going to go ahead and read 5:16, Fred, and then we can discuss it. So if there's any pronunciation stuff going on here that you notice, let me know, but I'll see if I can pick out anything too. Begins this way. Lego de pneumati peripatite ke epithemian sarkos ume teleste. Not much that I really notice going on there in the way of pronunciation that's difficult or challenging or anything like that. I do notice that right out of the gate, there's a number of P's, right? Pneumati, peripatite, epithemion. So you're getting some of that poo going on, which is kind of interesting. I'm always fascinated by the repetition of sounds and syllables in the text. But other than that, just remember your epsilon iotas sound exactly like iotas, which is E. So pneumati sounds like peripatite. That's all.
Yeah. Well, great. What a neat verse here. So I'm looking at information structural issues, connectors right away.
Mm-hmm.
I see a de. So this is a distinctive development. I see a Lego. So Lego de. The Lego is completely unnecessary. It is a meta comment. Paul is self-referentially referring to his own speaking. Moreover, I say. So all this is the Lego is teeing up what follows as particularly important. Paul's authorial voice is important. We've been looking at this throughout Galatians. I believe that Paul has been slandered in some way. And so these authorial voice comments are important because it helps the audience know that Paul is the one who is speaking this, that he's explicitly saying, I am the one saying, and this is what I'm saying. Pneumati peripite, peripatite. By the Spirit, walk. Be walking by the Spirit. Now, I said be walking because this is an imperfective aspect. Peripateo is an imperative form, second person plural. And the present imperative implies some kind of ongoingness, imperfective aspect. Pneumati pneumati is fronted. And so there's a little bit of stress there on it. In terms of here we have a classic, I think what would be an instance of a dative used as an instrument. So by means of the Spirit or in the Spirit. So somehow the Spirit becomes an agency or an instrument by which we're able to walk and walk in a certain way. And this word peripatita, peripateo, the walking is a kind of living. So this is related to living your life. It employs a metaphor that your life is like a journey and we're walking. And so when we walk in life's journey, that means how we live. We live a certain way. So
It's
walk
very
by
like
this by means of the Spirit. Be walking by the Spirit. And you have a ke, epithemion sarkos, the desire of the flesh, ume, you will not telestate, you will not complete. You will not ever, in no way complete. So you have the direct object of the verb telesate, which is a subjunctive form. Subjunctive form with ume. So that ume there with the subjunctive is a special construction of the subjunctive mood. It's an independent use of the subjunctive mood. This construction is called emphatic negation. And this is a strong denial. And teleo is kind of interesting because it has to do with like fulfillment or bringing it to an end, a goal. And so the desire of the flesh, you will not complete. You will not bring it to that completion point. So the desire of the flesh. So there's a contrast between realms. You have the spirit realm or the spirit agency or instrument, and then you have the agency of the flesh, which works through enticement of desire, the desire. So the desire which is given rise to out of the realm of the flesh or out of the body, the bodily flesh, you will not satisfy. So really there's a choice here between influence. What is going to be our primary influence? Is it going to be the spirit, or is it going to be the desires that come from the flesh that want us to fulfill those desires in a certain way? So there's a two-way choice here that Paul is laying forth here, and he's clearly urging walking by the Spirit. So and if you there's almost like an implied cause and effect. Scholars will talk about a category like a conditional imperative or something like that. The ume is equivalent to an imperative or a command because it's a strong denial. So I don't like creating labels like that. There is an implied cause and effect relationship, and we could restate it. If you walk by the Spirit, if you live by the Spirit, you will not fulfill the desire of the flesh. Okay, so that's kind of the conceptualization. Now, the grammar is not stated that way. It's not stated as a conditional sentence. It's stated as two command forms. And I think we need to respect that. You have a positive exhortation, and then you have a strong denial, a strong emphatic negation. And there is, I think, an implied causal relationship, certainly. If we indeed are walking in the realm of the Spirit or by the power of the Spirit, it really doesn't give room for us to listen to or give heed to the spirit, the flesh, which is trying to entice us by way of these desires, these epithumia, the epithumia of the flesh. And I think this raises all kinds of interesting questions about the nature of our flesh Does this mean flesh is bad? Paul earlier says in 2:20, Galatians 2:20, I live in the body by faith in the Son of God, or allegiance to the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. For life I live in the body. Well, the word there for body is actually the same word as flesh here. So Paul finds himself needing to be crucified, or at least identified with Christ in a way that he has a certain relationship in regard to himself, in regard to the world, I suppose. But he does find himself as a embodied person. And so he lives in the flesh, in the realm of the flesh, which is our realm. We're embodied creatures. He lives in allegiance and faith, dedication to Christ. And that certainly is possible. So flesh is not inherently bad. That viewpoint would be Platonic. But Paul does not ascribe to that. But there's something that is happening in our flesh, in our bodies, in our fallen state, the state of rebellion against God. There's something that happens with our body that weakens it, or weakens our will. It affects our will. And there's a real temptation to succumb to these bodily desires. And we all have them. There's different types. We could talk about the 7 deadly sins, and I don't know them off by heart. I could list maybe over half of them. But these are kind of like creaturely comforts or creaturely appetites that we struggle with. And they arise out of our fleshly existence in our present condition in the environment of the world, with all the commercials we're bombarded with. And this is where we find ourselves now. Paul was facing them in his day with the variety of temptations. We don't know exactly what they look like in his day, whether he was seeing stuff as he walked down the street, whether he was just feeling the hormones kind of burning in his desires, whether it's other kinds of bodily kind of temptations to eat too much, to look too long, to indulge in his body in ways that would be sinful. And so, I see this verse speaking to this struggle. And the salvation that God offers us, the way out when we're faced with these temptations, is by committing ourselves to live in the Spirit.
Yeah, it reminds me of the very Hebraic halakha, right? This walking is
Yeah.
living. I also find it interesting how the flesh talk comes after verse 15, which talks about biting and devouring one another. I mean, you think about that. I mean, you bite another person, you're sinking your teeth into their flesh.
Yeah.
And you're devouring them. So I don't think it's accidental that he's using the flesh language here. I got an email recently from someone, and they were asking about are desires sinful? Because this is something that actually my family and I, we've been doing some study together, and especially with our 2 older teenagers, we've been talking a lot about this. And I thought it might be good just for a moment to share a little bit about desire, temptation, and habit, because those are 3 different things. And I think that people maybe don't have good definitions of those, 1, and 2, because of that, they kind of conflate them and collapse them together. And so I was trying to explain to this person that desire isn't inherently sinful, but it can be. So this word epithumia, right? Desire isn't inherently sinful, just like flesh isn't inherently sinful, but desire can be sinful. And so the question becomes, well, how do we know when a desire is sinful? Well, let me take a minute and just talk about this. And I was trying to explain to this person that, like, look, desire typically refers, right, to a strong feeling or a wanting to have something.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it involves even a wishing for something to happen.
Yeah.
And so we could call that like intrinsic motivation, right? A motivation internal to oneself. It can be short lived, it can be persistent, like it can be long, it can be holy or it can be unholy. And here's how we determine, in my opinion, whether a desire is holy or not. We determine whether desire is holy or not by its end or by its end goal, right? I can want to shave my head, and that can be good or that can be bad. But it depends on the end goal of while I'm doing it, right? If why I'm doing it. If I'm shaving my head to donate my hair to cancer patients or show solidarity with them, then it can be a really good thing. We're able to determine that the desire was good by looking at what the end goal is. But if I shave my head to mark myself as a white supremacist, then that's a bad thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're able to determine that it's a bad thing by the end goal. So we know that a desire is good or bad, holy or unholy, by the end goal. And I think it's important too to distinguish desire from temptation. And you even used those words not as the same, but as you were talking, which kind of like triggered this for me.
Yeah.
I would, temptation, I think from a theological perspective, is enticement to act against God. I think that's how I'd probably
Mm-hmm.
define it. And I'm not speaking of like trivial temptations, I'm talking about the things that like really challenge like our core beliefs, our core values, our worldview. So these like significant temptations, those things with great gravity. So I think, right, there's a difference between being tempted like by a bag of chips, which is a temptation for me. Um, I would say that's trivial though compared to like promoting abortion or promoting the killing of someone or
Mm-hmm.
something with more gravity. So there's like these significant temptations, and they often challenge one's self-control, and will call into question, like I said, their values, their ethics, their beliefs, their established boundaries. And so temptation will usually emerge when a desire confronts an external stimulus, making that act of yielding to or resisting the
Yeah.
desire, a conscious choice. And that I think too is different than a habit. I think a habit is different than a desire. It's different than a temptation. It's
Mm-hmm.
this like settled or regular tendency or practice that we might
Mm-hmm.
have, and it's usually hard to give up, right? And I think I could be wrong here, but I tend to think that we can be predisposed to certain habits. I don't think we're predisposed to certain desires or predisposed to certain temptations, but I do think we can probably be predisposed to certain habits. Um, and that I think a lot of times can depend on our circumstances, right? If you're born to a mother who engaged in drug or alcohol use while you were in the womb, right? Or the house you grew up, the kind of words that were used, or the kind of foods you ate, right? And I think those kinds of habits are the result of your repeated actions and desires, and they often occur unconsciously. And while desires can fuel habits and temptations can challenge habits, I think habits are these like automatic behaviors that have been ingrained in us through repetition, and they no
Mm-hmm.
longer require active deliberation, right? Thinking about it. And so in the
Yeah.
end, I think we have to be really careful about confusing desire with habit, desire with temptation, and vice versa, right? But I think
Yeah.
those points, those terms are really important to get at here. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense and adds to the
Yeah.
conversation.
Totally does. Yeah. So at what point does a temptation become a sin?
Yeah, I think a
It's
temptation becomes a sin when you act on it. When,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think some of that acting can be in the imagination, can be in the
Oh,
heart. And
yeah, yeah, exactly.
this is one of the things that Jesus, he in the after the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount, and what are called the antitheses, 5:22 to 48, he takes he goes beyond the behavior to the motivation behind the behavior
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
heart condition. So, I mean, we can look at the behaviors and people by their fruit, but often behind that is a set of motivations or maybe goals or ends. And there can be layers to this. And this is where self reflection is important, being honest with each other. Sometimes we have blind spots, we have blinders up, like a horse, they have these blinders, and we're not aware of what we can't see. And we're just kind of going in a certain direction. And when we're in community, we need to, we can provide some perspective for people. But yeah, this desire arising in our bodies can become habituated. It can become
Right.
regular, and that becomes a habit. Yeah. And it
Yes.
can be attitudinal, which would be dispositional, like attitudes. It can actually be, we might have prejudicial attitudes, which, comes from our environment, but then we also participate in them at a certain level. And it might take a while to realize what's going on, and to have light shed on how hurtful our words or actions might be towards someone.
Mm.
Yeah, James talks about, in James 1, when someone's tempted, they're like, I'm tempted because God tempted me. James says, he says, don't blame God. God can't be tempted by evil. uh, but each one is tempted when that person is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Now, that word there that we translated as lust is epithumia.
Mm.
Epithumia, desire.
Yeah.
So desire wants to take root in us. And we can see the process of this happening with Eve in the garden, when she sees and then she begins to internalize and think and then desire it in a certain way, and
Yeah,
laying hold of that desire.
it's the
And
end
it's,
goal of the desire.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What's the goal of that?
Yeah.
So I love the fact that God, all temptation is common to people, but God is faithful and just. When we're tempted, he will also provide a way out. So that's 1 Corinthians 10:13. If you've not memorized that verse, you got to memorize that verse. And I've seen it again and again, that God does help us get out of certain situations. But at what point, though, does that temptation become a sin? And it can start inside, and we have to stop certain things happening, but then eventually it's going to manifest. And even if we think, oh, well, this is just happening inside of me, this is not affecting people. Well, I can tell you it is. I can tell you that it is affecting. You might be avoiding people. You might be looking at them in a certain way, and they can feel that. I know women, beautiful women, that they've been looked at a certain way and lusted after. It affects them. I've talked to them. I've talked to them about it. It affects them. It affects them to be ogled, and that kind of thing. So, my own struggle in that regard, I would notice my not even wanting to look or even engage them. Well, guess what? That's even affecting them, because I'm not able to relate to them as human being. So I chose not to be in that presence, but
Mm.
that was my best attempt of dealing with it. But even that was probably adversely affecting them. So, I mean, think of anger, how that can affect us, and different kinds of things. So, yeah, desire, though, is not always bad, and I can take you
No,
to some verses.
not.
Philippians 1:23, Paul says, I have a strong desire to depart and to be with Christ, for that is very much better. So here Paul's longing, the desire is to be with Christ. Jesus talks about, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you. There's the word again, epithumia. Paul says, we have been very eager with great desire to see you. So he's talking to the Thessalonians, writing a letter. He says, I have this great desire to see you. So here the same word is used positively. So we don't have to be Buddhist in the sense of having to empty out all desire. I mean, that's one response. One response is like, I'm not going to deal with any of this, and I'm going to get rid of all of my desire. But that would be adopting a Platonic worldview where matter and physical stuff related to my body is bad, and only the mind and the spirit is good. That's not a biblical worldview. And the good news is that the Lord can give us victory and can transform us, shape us on the inside. And I think it comes by way of like our worldview and what we care about and our values. But more than that, it's not just a mechanical thought process kind of thing. As much as I like thought processes and theology and reflecting on all these things, there's actually God's person and power that can affect change in us that is beyond our comprehension. So as much as I love thoughts and ideas, it also comes down to a presence of the person of the Godhead in our life, God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, that can affect these changes. And sometimes we need to pray for forgiveness, think about things anew, and just say, I don't feel like doing this, but I am going to ask you to forgive this person. I'm going to ask you to do this or that. And we can start to be shaped. And this is the importance of spiritual disciplines, taking up certain postures, bowing, kneeling, even getting on the ground prostrate can communicate something about ourselves, our bodies, to get them. And I think even speaking prayers out loud is important, not to just keep it in the mind. More and more research. I was just talking to a counseling friend in our small group, Ben, and he was just sharing about how when people are in community and in small group setting and they're struggling with sin, when they hear from like a victim's perspective, the hurt and how this affects them, it changes the potentially or offending party. Like when they see that, when they're in their community and they start to see this, and it changes, it can cause like repentance to kind of well up in them. So the importance of Christian community, the importance of confession, the importance of being honest with each other is just huge in this transformation of our affections, our feelings, our dispositions. Yeah.
Well, yeah, good. So let's go to 17. This is a long verse, yeah.
Yeah, 17.
Two whole lines here. Yeah, 17. Egar sarx epithumi katatu pneumatos. So the pneuma katate sarkos tata. Gar aledius andikite. Ina me a ean delete. Tavta puete. Yeah, wow. I don't see a lot there to really comment on as far as pronunciation. I'll just point out one or two things real quick. In the andikite, that's a little challenging, I think, for maybe a lot of people to pronounce. Andikite. The stress is in a weird place. I think for native English speakers, we'd probably prefer the stress to be on the key, andikite, but andikite. And then in that same word, you have the new tav together, and you remember that when tav follows a new like that, it turns into like a soft D sound. So that's the one place in Koine we get kind of a D sound on dikite. So yeah, we have that, and the word right before that, Alelius, has three lambdas. We have that double lambda there. You can kind of just hold it for a split second longer. Alelius. So that's all I really have in terms of pronunciation here.
All right. Well, as we look at kind of translating and pulling this apart, there's a lot of connectors, and we have to follow the logic.
There's been a lot of connectors all the way back, but just to interrupt, I mean, right, all the way back, the first one we don't, I guess here with 14 we do have a connector. 13 we have the gar as well. 12 we don't really have
12
one.
we
do
don't.
have the ke, but That's
We don't have one in 10 either. So 10 doesn't have one, 9 doesn't have one, 8 doesn't have one, 7 doesn't have one.
so he had
So
a lot of single standalone verses there, and then he just started piling on.
yeah, and then in verse 17, the way that the versification has, you've got a couple gar clauses, you got a de clause. These are all independent. Then you have ina me or ina, and then you have an aeon. So you have a couple subordinate clauses. So just in this one verse, you have 5 different connectors, and we have to kind of unpack that. So the gar is a strengthening. For the flesh desires against the spirit. Moreover, but the spirit against the flesh. So the de indicates distinctive development. In this case, it's contrastive because of the content. So, for the spirit desires against the flesh desires against the spirit. Moreover, or but the spirit against the flesh. Gar, supporting that statement, for these things are opposed to one another. For these are opposed to one another. So tafta there, tafta gar, the tafta is neuter, plural, referring back to the sarx, which is feminine, and the ta pneuma, the spirit. And so together those become 2 kind of entities which are treated as kind of like object or entities in the neuter. So tavta means these things, and then you have a third singular verb, antikete, are opposed to one another. For these are opposed to one another. So here Paul is drawing a stark contrast between the spirit and the flesh. And these are at odds, and they're abutted against each other. I think he's speaking like flesh in terms of fallen flesh. Jesus came in the likeness of sinful flesh, but his flesh was not fallen, but he was embodied and enfleshed. But in our current condition, in the aftermath of the sinning of the human race, starting with Adam and Eve, our flesh becomes a place where there's often a conflict of doing God's will. We don't do it. We don't want to do it.
I don't
And
know.
so he's saying the spirit and the flesh are in opposition to each other.
I don't know I don't know. I would say maybe he's arguing that the desires of the flesh and the desires of the spirit are what's in opposition to one another, rather than just like bald or blank like spirit versus flesh.
That's good.
Desires.
Yeah, and that's a good correction. So the spirit desires against the flesh. Yeah, that's important. So again, though, the flesh as in the fallen atmosphere, like it didn't have to be that way, but it is that way now. The flesh is weakened. Sin weakens the flesh, and it actually, when the law comes, we want to disobey it. So Paul make that point, or has made that point, and will make that point in Romans. So there's conflicting desiring going on.
Yes.
And these are opposed. And now it's this what's really interesting is the second part of 17 there. You see the ina me, in order that. Now typically I see ina as some kind of goal. But sometimes it seems like it's less goal and more result. And that may be. But there could be a way. I think sometimes we need to just wrestle with it a little bit and recover an ancient logic. What for us might not seem like a purpose statement or a means to an end, maybe in an ancient conceptualization, it might be there in a way. I'm not saying that Ina can't ever maybe have a sense of result, but if it does, it's probably for effect. It's probably there's some kind of it's a way to kind of emphasize this result, like it's almost a purpose. We're going to mark it with something that typically marks purpose, but it's to stress that particular goal or that end resultant end. But here, I think to translate it, first of all, in order that, so these are opposed to one another, in order that, or with the result that whichever you want not, these things you end up doing. I think that's how I would translate that. I want to walk around that a little bit more. The ina may, when we see that together, sometimes we want to go to like a negative purpose statement, like lest or in order that not. I don't think that that's what's going on here. I think the may is negating the relative clause that begins with the aeon thelite. Now, this is not just any relative clause. It is a conditional relative clause. So we could also say it's a conditional clause. It's a relative conditional clause. So this is combining two types of subordinate clauses, a relative clause and a conditional clause. And together, we could translate that first part as whatever you want. And then we're going to negate that. That may is going to negate whatever you want. So not whatever you want, these things you do. That's the main clause. So these things you do is not what you want, in other words. So there's conflict. There's a conflict that takes place and that takes place in the matter of willing. Willing is one thing and the doing is another thing.
Yeah,
and our
that's why.
bodies are the places where often the doing is inactuated. It's inactuated through our flesh. Yeah. Michael.
I was just gonna say this is why when I was defining desire, I'm saying you determine whether that is good or bad, holy or unholy by the end goal, right? Because it ends up being, well, what did you want to do? Like, what did you want to accomplish? Because then we can look at that end goal of what you wanted and tell whether it was good or godly or bad or ungodly, right? So that if what you wanted was to, do this sinful thing, then that's what, like what's gonna happen. So if that's not what you wanted, then that's different. So yeah, I have a little tension reading this here because I don't know, like I think of like Romans 7, right? And how I'm reading that, like
what part of Romans 7? Explain that a little bit
well,
more.
just the idea of where that's often read through the lens of like I keep sinning, I keep doing these things that I don't want to do, and I really like the reading of that where no, this is Paul pre Damascus Road encounter, sort of talking, and then once you get into like Romans 8, it's more Paul post Damascus Road talking. So you don't have this like warring going on in the flesh for someone who holds to a view of like a high view of sanctification. This kind of verse right here would make me squirm a little bit, and that's okay. But is this? I guess I would say this isn't how the Christian life is supposed to look. It isn't supposed to look like, well, I'm a Christian, but I keep doing this thing I don't want to do. That's not how the Christian life is supposed to look.
I would agree. Agree with that.
That's the fleshly life.
Yeah.
The Christian life is I wanted to walk in the Spirit and do this thing that God wanted, and so that's what I did, right? But the fleshly life is, no, I had this want, and I did what I wanted, and thus the end result. Yeah. So you see what my struggle here?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough verse. I'm looking at different translations, and they're really doing different things with it. Let me see if I can try to unpack that. One way to take it is to understand that this opposition is a good thing. The
Mm,
Spirit comes in so that it opposes the flesh in order that whatever we want to do, we don't do.
yeah, whatever we wanted to
Yeah.
do,
Whatever we
we
want to
don't
do, we
do,
don't do.
but
Now
we do
he
what the Spirit wanted us to do.
yeah. Yeah. Now
That's
yeah. Yeah.
I like that.
He he is using second person. You. He's not
Yeah,
saying we.
yeah, yeah, y'all.
I think he's speaking more hypothetically with the struggle myself. Now, another way to take it is, well, I guess it's in a similar vein as that. These are opposed to each other to prevent you from doing what you want.
Yes, yes, I love that. I
Yeah,
love
that's the
that. Yeah,
NRSV. So the
yeah.
first one was NASB, so that you may not do the things that you please. The NRSV is to prevent you from doing what you want.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Uh,
that to
uh,
me captures the sense and alleviates some of that tension I was feeling. Um, yeah.
okay, so the NIV 2011 says they are in conflict with each other so that you are not able to do whatever you want. And I think
No,
that's
I don't. That's too much. This is too free. um,
I I'm taking it a little bit more that yeah, I guess you could say that the Spirit serves a preventative function. I guess
yes, of
so
course.
the ina me, in order that would make it a little bit more direct purpose. So these are at opposition to each other according to God's design after the fall, to have the Spirit that they're in opposition. The Spirit is in opposition with the flesh in order that whatever you want to do, these things you do. That, to me, that's the problem. The Greek has this tavta, these things you do, in order that you would do these things. So that's really the goal. The goal, we have to break it apart. The ina really works with the tavta poiete in order that you would do these things, not whatever you want.
Not what you
Yeah,
want.
not whatever you want. So not whatever you want, these things you do. Mm.
No,
It's
I
a
like that. I like that NRSV one. Um,
to
that
prevent
to
you,
me, yeah, that to me captures.
lest whatever you want, these things you would do. Okay. Yeah, I think I could go with that. So in this case, then, what that means is that the ina may works together to form a negative purpose. Um,
Yeah, I just
yeah.
reading Paul in context. I've like the larger context. It seems to me, and admittedly from like a Wesleyan holiness perspective, it seems to me that he is saying that the
Mhm.
spirit and the flesh are opposed,
Yeah.
perhaps by God's design, and that you have these desires of things that you want to do, but the
Hmm.
spirit comes in and challenges and opposes those desires and reforms them so that you're no longer doing the things you want to do, but the thing God wants you to do.
Hmm. Yeah. All right.
And
I think I can accept that.
and
It's
it,
tricky, but
it
yeah.
sets the stage for what's about to be said, this huge comparison between the fruit of the flesh and the fruit of the spirit, which just comes in the next couple of verses.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
So,
good. All
yeah.
right.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. Well,
I got a quote.
Yeah,
I got a
yeah.
quote.
What's your
E. Stanley Jones. So he was, if you don't know about E. Stanley Jones, you should look him up. Eli Stanley Jones. This, I mean, I chose this before we started looking at this, but it says your capacity to say no determines your capacity to say yes to greater things.
Yeah, very fitting. Wow,
Yeah.
excellent. Well, thank you all for watching or listening. Thanks so much for supporting the podcast. It's growing, slow drip kind of growing, but it's doing well, and we're getting engagement more and more frequently. And perhaps in a future episode, we'll give some shout outs, but we're really grateful for that. And if you would go ahead and just like this video, share it and subscribe. We'd really appreciate all that. And until next time, we hope that helps.
You are listening to Proof Text, a Galosa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Fredrick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Galosa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Galosa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glosahouse.com today. Galosa House, language resources for the global community.